Welcome back to Cluster Fudge, the podcast where we peel back the polite curtain and talk about what's really going on underneath. I'm your host, Alexandra, and today's episode, it's going to rattle some cages. We're calling it No Sympathy for the Criminals. Why? Because we've reached a cultural tipping point. While empathy and understanding have their place, we also have to talk about consequences, accountability, and evil. Yes, I said it. Evil. This is not about cancel culture. This is not about political correctness. This is about asking a simple question. Why are we so quick to make excuses for the people who hurt others the most? Let's dig in. What we mean by criminals. Let's start by getting one thing straight. When I say criminals, I'm not talking about someone who stole a loaf of bread because they were hungry. I'm not talking about the person who made a bad decision in their teens and is now doing community service for vandalism. I'm talking about the violent, the remorseless, the predatory. I'm talking about the people who rape, kill, maim, traffic, assault and exploit. I'm talking about serial offenders, not someone with a single misdemeanor, but the people who choose to harm again and again. And yes, that includes white-collar criminals too. The ones who bankrupt lives, steal retirement funds, price gouge medications, and walk away with a slap on the wrist. Clarifying the line between crime and evil. There's this growing discomfort in our culture with using the word evil. We want to label everything as a symptom. Childhood trauma, mental illness, bad influences. But at what point do we say, this isn't just brokenness? This is cruelty. This is calculated. This is chosen. When someone deliberately kidnaps, tortures and kills, that's not just a symptom of a failed society. That's a predator. And predators should be locked away, not explained away. The problem with romanticizing criminals. Let's talk about the Bundy effect. The weird phenomenon where murderers like Ted Bundy, Richard Ramirez and Jeffrey Dahmer develop cult followings. Women writing them letters in prison, fans making thirst edits on TikTok. Netflix dropping true crime dramas that cast good-looking actors and then acting shocked when audiences start crushing. We are literally entertaining ourselves with the trauma of victims, turning sociopaths into celebrities, and I'm not okay with that. These people didn't just do something bad. They destroyed lives, families, generations. You want to be fascinated? Fine, but don't confuse curiosity with compassion, and don't you dare romanticize what should make your stomach turn. White-collar criminals deserve scrutiny too. And let's not forget, violence isn't the only form of destruction. There are criminals who wear suits, who smile on magazine covers, who steal billions, commit mass fraud, or crash economies and still go home to their private islands. Just because they didn't kill with a weapon doesn't mean they didn't kill people's futures. People commit suicide over bankruptcy, over losing their homes, over being robbed of their savings. But somehow, these white-collar wolves get to say mistake instead of crime. Drawing the moral line. So when I say no sympathy for the criminals, I mean no sympathy for the people who know they're hurting others and don't care. No sympathy for repeat offenders who manipulate their way through the system. No sympathy for child abusers, rapists, serial killers, human traffickers, or billionaires who bankrupt entire towns and call it business. Sympathy is a powerful thing, and if we give it to the wrong people, we start forgetting who the real victims are. In this podcast, we're going to talk a lot about justice, about pain, about where society's heart should be, but we have to start here by defining exactly who we're talking about. Up next, we take a closer look at how this culture of empathy for criminals really started and how it's turning into a dangerous trend that's affecting not just our courtrooms, but our collective conscience. The rise of criminal empathy. So how did we get here? How did we go from justice for victims to understanding for the people who hurt them? Welcome to the era of criminal empathy, where the conversation is no longer just about what someone did, but why they did it. And sure, that might sound progressive, but is it really helping anyone? 1. True crime as therapy or theatre. Let's start with the obvious. True crime content is everywhere. Podcasts, documentaries, dramatized Netflix specials. We are obsessed with peering into the minds of murderers. But it's a slippery slope. What starts as fascination quickly turns into humanization. And while that might sound noble, let's understand the roots of evil, it often becomes a twisted narrative where the criminal becomes the main character and the victims become background noise. How often do you remember the name of the victim in a Ted Bundy doc? Now, how often do you remember his name? 2. Therapeutic justice versus accountability. Now, don't get me wrong, I believe in trauma-informed care. I believe people can be broken by their pasts. But here's where I draw the line. Your trauma does not entitle you to traumatize others. We've moved into this zone of therapeutic justice where we're so focused on rehabilitation, we forget that some people aren't willing to be rehabilitated. Some people weaponize the system's empathy. They learn the language, the buzzwords, the "I was abused" speech, and they use it to minimize their crimes. But guess what? A victim who becomes a monster is still a monster. Full stop. 3. The bad guy as victim narrative in pop culture. Look at how media reframes villains now. Every movie and show has to have the criminal's tragic backstory. They were bullied, they were neglected, they were misunderstood. Think of shows like You, where Joe is a literal stalker and killer, but he's portrayed as charming, damaged, and even desirable. Or Joker, where suddenly a domestic terrorist becomes a symbol of misunderstood pain. When does understanding cross the line into excusing? The shift from justice to both sides. Another problem is this growing need to see both sides. In journalism, documentaries, even social media debates, we're constantly reminded not to judge too quickly. But in cases of clear, intentional, violent harm, why are we still asking people to humanize the criminal? A woman gets raped and the comments say, "But he was drunk, he had a rough childhood, he deserves a second chance." Meanwhile, the survivor is re-traumatized, disbelieved, and left with a lifetime of PTSD. Both sides doesn't work when only one side is doing the destroying. 5. The psychological need to make sense of evil. Here's the truth. We want to believe there's a reason behind evil because it makes us feel safer. If we can say he was abused or he was mentally ill, then we can believe we're immune, that we aren't in danger because we had good parents or were mentally healthy. But not all violence can be explained. Sometimes it's just willful cruelty. Sometimes it's a choice, and that's hard to accept. Empathy can be powerful when it's aimed at the right place. We need empathy for the kids growing up in broken homes. We need empathy for communities over-policed and underserved. But we also need boundaries. Empathy without accountability becomes enablement. So ask yourself this: who are we centering in these stories? Because when the camera's always on the criminal, someone else's pain is fading quietly into the background. When rehabilitation fails, it's time we ask a hard question. What happens when rehabilitation fails? Because as much as we want to believe in second chances, some people don't want to change. Some people use rehabilitation like a revolving door. In one side as a victim of circumstance, out the other as a predator who knows how to play the system. 1. The philosophy behind rehabilitation. Let's start with why we even try to rehabilitate people. The justice system, at least in theory, should aim to correct, not just punish. That means offering therapy, education, job training, and a support system to help offenders re-enter society safely and productively. It's a beautiful idea, and for some it works. The non-violent offender who got caught selling weed in their teens? Yeah, give that person a second chance. But when we apply this same idealism to serial rapists, child abusers, or repeat violent criminals, we're putting hope above evidence. 2. The reality of recidivism. Let's talk numbers. According to the US Bureau of Justice Statistics, nearly 44% of released prisoners are rearrested within 1 year, and about 68% within 3 years. And get this, for certain crimes, like sexual assault, recidivism is underreported, not necessarily uncommon. Rehabilitation only works when the person wants to be rehabilitated. A sociopath in therapy isn't gaining insight, they're gaining language. They learn how to manipulate even better. They learn what the parole board wants to hear, and they use it. 3. Psychopathy, narcissism and manipulation. There's a reason prisons are full of people with cluster B personality disorders. Antisocial personality, narcissistic personality, psychopathy. These are not depressed or anxious individuals. These are people who lack remorse, people who don't feel empathy. You cannot reprogram someone who doesn't think they've done anything wrong. You can't rehabilitate someone who sees victims as objects or opportunities. Therapy won't help a man who gets off on control and domination. It'll just teach him how to lie better next time. 4. The problem with blanket solutions. Our system wants one-size-fits-all justice. But guess what? It's not one size. Some people grow, some people rot. And when we insist on giving everyone the benefit of the doubt, we endanger the people who deserve protection the most. How many women have been raped or killed by someone who was just released early for good behavior? How many children have been hurt by someone who was rehabilitated until they weren't? 5. Restorative justice doesn't mean ignoring risk. There's this growing trend of restorative justice programs. The idea is bring together the offender and the victim or their family, promote healing, open dialogue, community rebuilding. Again, it's beautiful in the right context, but when applied to violent crime, it becomes tone-deaf at best, traumatic at worst. What does a rape survivor owe their rapist? What closure is a mother supposed to find in hugging her child's killer? Forgiveness is personal. Healing is sacred. And no one should be expected to take part in a criminal's redemption story just to prove they're mature enough to move on. Look, I believe people can change, but I also believe in patterns. And when someone has shown you who they are, time and time again, believing them isn't harsh, it's survival. The system keeps throwing lifelines to people who use them to drag others down. And somewhere in the obsession with redemption, we forgot the most important rule of justice: protect the innocent. Coming up next, let's look at what happens when we blur the lines between criminal and celebrity, and how true crime culture is reshaping our understanding of guilt, fame, and fascination. Justice versus revenge. There's a fine line between justice and revenge, but let's not pretend they're the same thing. In a world where everyone wants someone to pay, we need to ask, what are we actually fighting for? Accountability or bloodlust? Truth or vengeance? Because sometimes our so-called justice system feels more like a performance of pain, not a path toward healing. 1. Defining the difference. Let's break it down. Justice is supposed to be rooted in fairness. It's about balance, accountability, and protection. Revenge, on the other hand, is deeply emotional. It's personal. It says, you made me suffer, now I want you to suffer too. Revenge doesn't aim to restore, it aims to wound. But here's where things get tricky. The justice system often looks like revenge because pain demands a witness. Victims want the world to see what happened to them. And sometimes we confuse punishment with peace.
Oh, no, too.
Why we crave revenge. Let's be real. The instinct for revenge is human. When someone hurts you, or someone you love, your brain floods with cortisol, adrenaline, rage. You want equilibrium. You want to make it even. That impulse is ancient, tribal, eye for an eye. But in modern society, if justice becomes just another form of sanctioned cruelty, we lose our moral high ground. We start creating more victims instead of preventing more harm. How the system plays to our bloodlust. Politicians and prosecutors know this. That's why they use words like throw the book at him or no mercy. They know voters respond to tough on crime language, but often those harsh sentences aren't about public safety, they're about public approval. Let's not forget, many prosecutors are elected. So when we cheer for longer sentences, for maximum punishment, we're feeding a machine that's less about truth and more about theatrics. 4. When justice backfires. Here's the irony. Sometimes the thirst for revenge undermines justice entirely. Think about wrongful convictions. There are cases where police, under pressure to solve it fast, pin a crime on the first convenient suspect, even if the evidence is weak. Prosecutors manipulate juries, witnesses are coerced, because the appearance of justice is enough to make people feel better, even if it's not real justice at all. And what happens then? An innocent person suffers, a guilty person walks free, and the actual victim, they never get the truth. Restorative as retributive models. Some criminal justice experts argue that we need to shift from retributive justice to restorative justice. Retributive justice says you broke the law, now you pay. Restorative justice says you caused harm, now let's repair the damage. That might sound soft, but in many cases, especially with young offenders or non-violent crimes, restorative practices have been proven to reduce recidivism and empower victims. Still, let's be honest, it's not always appropriate. You don't sit a child molester in a circle and ask them to apologize over tea, but the bigger message here is justice can include healing. It doesn't always have to mean pain. 6. What victims really want. Here's the part people miss. Most victims don't actually want revenge. They want to be believed. They want to feel safe again. They want to know it won't happen to someone else. That doesn't always mean maximum prison time or a death sentence. Sometimes it means real reform, access to trauma counselling, or changes in the system that failed them. Justice should honour victims, not just punish perpetrators. So no, justice isn't revenge, and revenge isn't justice. One is about healing, the other is about hurting. And if we keep confusing the two, we risk building a society that looks tough on crime, but remains completely disconnected from the pain that caused it in the first place. Coming up next, we explore the cultural obsession with criminals turned celebrities and how turning evil into entertainment distorts our moral compass. White-collar crime, the untouchables. Let's talk about the kind of criminals who don't get stopped and frisked, the ones who wear suits, not hoodies, the ones who destroy lives with spreadsheets, not switchblades. Welcome to the world of white-collar crime, where theft is legal adjacent, consequences are optional, and the justice system looks the other way. 1. What counts as white-collar crime? White-collar crime isn't a petty shoplift or a back-alley deal. It's fraud, embezzlement, insider trading, money laundering, bribery, Ponzi schemes, crimes that are financial in nature but catastrophic in impact. Think Bernie Madoff, Elizabeth Holmes, Enron, FTX, Wells Fargo. These aren't random street thugs. These are CEOs, CFOs, and Ivy League alumni. Let's talk numbers. Street-level crime might cost you a phone, maybe your car, maybe your peace of mind. But white-collar crime? It bleeds billions, $300 to $800 billion lost every year in the US due to corporate fraud, tax evasion, healthcare scams, and securities violations. That's more than all street crime combined. And the victims? Everyday people, retirees who lose pensions, patients overbilled by hospitals, taxpayers left footing the bill after financial meltdowns. Justice looks different in a suit. Here's where it gets ugly. While someone might spend 25 years behind bars for stealing a TV during a riot, a hedge fund manager can steal millions from investors and maybe get 5 years in a cushy, low-security prison. If that, some white-collar criminals never serve time at all. They pay a fine, often less than what they made in profit, and walk away. It's not a justice system. It's a gentleman's slap on the wrist. Connections, class, and colour. White-collar criminals don't just get off easy because of money. They also benefit from networks of power, expensive lawyers, political connections, media narratives that frame them as visionaries who simply made mistakes. And, let's not lie, race plays a role too. A black teen with weed gets a record. A white billionaire with offshore accounts gets a TED Talk. The public narrative around who is dangerous is built on optics, not facts. 5. The public's selective outrage. Why don't people riot over white-collar crime? Because it's invisible. It's boring. It's wrapped in jargon and spreadsheets. It doesn't look criminal, and it doesn't make for juicy headlines. But make no mistake, families go bankrupt. Suicides happen after financial ruin. Communities collapse when pension funds are raided. This isn't victimless. This is engineered devastation. And yet our empathy remains strangely absent. If you ever doubted that the justice system is biased, look at how it treats a kid who steals formula versus a banker who wipes out people's life savings. One is labelled a criminal, the other gets a speaking gig at Davos. Coming up next, we dive into the bizarre celebrity status some criminals achieve and why society can't seem to stop glamorizing evil. But they deserve a second chance. We've all heard it, but they deserve a second chance. It's one of the most polarizing phrases in the justice conversation, and it raises a critical question. Where does forgiveness end and enablement begin? 1. The ideal of redemption versus reality. At its core, the idea of second chances is about rehabilitation. It assumes that people can change, that we're more than our worst moment. And for many, especially those impacted by systemic injustice, second chances are necessary and humane. But in today's culture, this second chance often gets handed out selectively. Celebrities bounce back from scandals, influencers rebrand and relaunch, white-collar criminals write memoirs and start podcasts. Meanwhile, the kid caught with weed at 17 still can't get a job at 27. 2. Who actually gets a second chance? Let's be honest, not everyone gets that clean slate. Our society is far more forgiving of those with money, media power, or a certain image. If you're charming, well-spoken, and media-trained, you're reformed. If you're poor, mentally ill, or came from the system, you're a repeat offender. The truth is, we don't hand out second chances fairly, and sometimes what we call a second chance is just a revolving door of leniency for people who never faced real accountability in the first place. 3. Second chance, no consequences. Here's where it gets tricky. People conflate a second chance with no consequences at all. A second chance means you've done the work, you've made amends, you've faced the music. Not that we skip accountability entirely because you cried on a podcast or found Jesus in prison. Forgiveness is not immunity. Growth is not a PR campaign. 4. The TikTok-ification of redemption. And let's talk about what social media has done to this idea. We now have convicted criminals, some violent, some manipulative, turning their redemption story into content. TikToks from prison. Instagram lives talking about the lessons they've learned. Fan bases saying they've changed after a single apology video. It's not healing. It's rebranding. Redemption without restitution is a scam, and some people are cashing in. When we shouldn't give second chances. Here's the uncomfortable truth. There are some cases where the harm done is so deep, the damage so wide, that maybe a second chance isn't owed. Serial abusers, child predators, mass manipulators who destroyed lives and economies. These aren't mistakes. These are choices often repeated, calculated, and systemic. Forgiveness is a personal journey, not a societal obligation, especially when the person never even truly apologizes. So when we say they deserve a second chance, we need to ask, who's saying it, who benefits from it, and who's still paying for the first chance they never got? Up next, the blurred lines between criminal and celebrity, and why our obsession with infamy may be making everything worse. When compassion hurts society. Compassion is a beautiful thing. It's the foundation of justice, empathy, and healing. But like any powerful tool, compassion can be misused. Sometimes what we call compassion actually hurts society, enabling more harm than healing. 1. The danger of misplaced compassion. When we extend sympathy to criminals without considering the impact of their actions, we risk normalizing bad behavior. Imagine a community where every crime is met with "let's understand why they did it," but no one addresses the damage done. Victims feel ignored, accountability slips away. Compassion without accountability can become complicity. 2. The social cost of soft justice. In some circles, the call for rehabilitation, not punishment, has turned into an excuse for light sentences, early releases, or reduced consequences, even for serious offenders. While we absolutely must reform broken systems, a society that's too quick to forgive without reform risks becoming unsafe. This can lead to rising crime rates, victims losing faith in the system, communities feeling abandoned and vulnerable. 3. Victim impact often overlooked. Here's the brutal truth. In the rush to forgive and rehabilitate, victims' voices are often sidelined. The emotional, financial, and physical toll on victims doesn't disappear just because we feel sorry for the perpetrator. True justice means balancing empathy for the offender and honouring the pain of those affected. Fourth, compassion fatigue and public backlash. When society keeps pushing forgiveness without tangible results, compassion fatigue sets in. People grow cynical, angry, and disillusioned with the justice system. And when that happens, the pendulum often swings toward harsh punitive measures, sometimes unjustly so. The question is, how do we find balance? 5. Finding the middle ground. We need a justice system rooted in both empathy and consequences, recognizing the humanity of criminals without erasing the harm they've caused, providing support and second chances when earned, not given as a default, centering victims alongside offenders in the conversation about healing and safety. Compassion should never mean turning a blind eye. When compassion ignores justice, it ceases to be compassion. It becomes a dangerous weakness. This is the hard conversation we need to have if we ever want real change. Coming up next, we wrap it all up and ask, in a world where criminals walk free and victims suffer, where do we stand? Where do we go from here? So we've laid it all out, the messy, uncomfortable truths about crime, justice, and society's uneasy relationship with criminals. Where do we go from here? First, we acknowledge that justice isn't one size fits all. It requires nuance, accountability, and yes, sometimes mercy, but only when it's earned and fair. We have to stop treating criminals as one monolithic group, the violent, the greedy, the desperate. Each needs to be addressed on their own terms. We demand a system that holds everyone accountable, from the streets to the boardrooms, equally. No more untouchables, no more leniency for some and harsh punishment for others. But accountability alone isn't enough. We need prevention, education, community support, mental health services, and economic opportunities that address the root causes of crime. And we must centre victims in every step. Their pain, their healing, and their voices matter. The path forward isn't easy. It requires courage to face uncomfortable truths and dismantle systems that protect the privileged. But if we want a society that's truly just, safe, and compassionate, we have no choice but to walk it. Thank you for joining me on this hard but necessary journey. This is Cluster Fudge. I'm Alexandra. Until next time, stay thoughtful, stay critical, and most of all, stay real. You've been listening to Cluster Fudge with me, Alexandra. If today's episode challenged you, good. It's time we stop confusing kindness with naivety. Share this episode, send me your thoughts, and let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay sharp, stay awake, and protect your peace.